The stagecoach door swung open, and every eye in Red Hollow turned to watch a woman step into the dust, alone, defiant, and carrying nothing but a single worn bag. Within minutes, she'd be cornered in a general store by men who thought they owned the world. Within hours, she'd be riding toward a ranch that had broken stronger people. And before the sun set on Iron Ridge, she'd proved that survival wasn't about being welcomed. It was about refusing to disappear. This is the story of a woman who walked into hell and made it kneel. Stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Clara's story travels. The stagecoach rattled into Red Hollow like a dying animal, wheels grinding over ruts that hadn't been fixed in a decade. The driver didn't bother helping passengers down anymore, not in a town like this, where courtesy had dried up years ago along with the creek that used to run behind Main Street. Clara Vance stepped onto the wooden platform and felt 20 pairs of eyes lock onto her before her boots even touched the ground. She didn't flinch. The town was exactly what she'd expected, a collection of sun-bleached buildings leaning into each other for support, false front stores with paint peeling like old skin, and a main street wide enough for two wagons to pass without touching, but narrow enough that everyone's business became everyone else's. A woman traveling alone was bad enough. A woman traveling alone and standing upright, that was asking for trouble. Clara adjusted the strap of her canvas bag and started walking. The whispers followed immediately. Look at her. No husband? No family? What's a woman like that doing here? Probably running from something. Or someone. She'd heard it all before. In the last town. And the one before that. Grief had a way of making you a ghost, and ghosts made people nervous. Her husband had been dead 8 months. Typhoid had taken him in 3 days, faster than she could process, slower than she could bear. The farm went next, then the debts, then everything else that tied her to a life she'd thought was permanent. Now she had $73, one change of clothes, and a newspaper clipping folded in her pocket advertising work at a place called Iron Ridge Ranch. Cook wanted, room and board, inquire in Red Hollow. It wasn't much, but much wasn't what she needed. She needed anything. The general store sat at the end of the street, its windows dusty and cracked. Clara pushed through the door, and the bell above it rang sharp and accusing. 4 men stood near the counter. They turned as one. The youngest, maybe 19, with a scraggly attempt at a beard, grinned immediately. Well now, look what the wind dragged in. Clara ignored him. She walked straight to the counter where an older man with a stained apron stood weighing nails. I'm looking for work, she said. Iron Ridge Ranch. The storekeeper didn't look up. That's so. I saw the posting. It said to inquire here. Posting's 3 weeks old. Is the job still available? He finally lifted his eyes. They were flat, uninterested. You sure you want it? I wouldn't be here if I wasn't. One of the men laughed, a low, ugly sound. He was older than the others, maybe 40, with a face like cracked leather. Iron Ridge ain't no place for a lady. Good thing I'm not asking to be treated like one, Clara said. That got their attention. The man stepped closer. He smelled like sweat and tobacco. You got a mouth on you. I've got a lot of things, Clara said evenly. None of them your business. The youngest one snickered. She's got fire, Cleet. Maybe Cross'll like that. Cleet's grin didn't reach his eyes. Cross don't like much of anything, especially women who think they can survive out there playing house for 20 men. Clara met his stare without blinking. Then it's fortunate I'm not interested in playing anything. The room went quiet. Cleet took another step forward, close enough now that Clara could see the broken veins in his nose. You think you're tough, lady? I think I'm here for work, Claire said, and I think you're in my way. For a second it looked like he might actually do something. His hand twitched, his jaw tightened, and then a voice cut through the room like a blade. Cleet! Everyone turned. The man standing in the doorway wasn't tall, but he didn't need to be. He had the kind of presence that made the air feel heavier just by existing. Dark hair, dark eyes, a jaw that looked like it had been carved out of stone and left unfinished. He wore a dusty coat and a hat pulled low, and he didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Cleet stepped back immediately. Boss, didn't see you there. Clearly. The man's gaze moved to Clara. It wasn't friendly, but it wasn't cruel either, just assessing. You the one asking about the cook job? Clara straightened. I am. You got experience? 10 years running my own kitchen, fed a household, and hired hands during harvest. This ain't a household. I'm aware. He studied her for a long moment. Clara didn't fidget, didn't look away. She'd learned a long time ago that the only thing worse than being judged was looking like you cared. Finally, he nodded toward the door. Walk with me. She didn't hesitate. Outside, the wind had picked up, kicking dust into spirals that danced down the street. The man walked a few paces ahead, then stopped near a hitching post where a dark bay horse stood waiting. Ethan Cross, he said without turning. I own Iron Ridge. Clara Vance. You married? Widowed. Kids? No. He turned then, and she saw his face properly for the first time. Hard lines. No softness anywhere. The kind of face that had stopped expecting good things a long time ago. You know what you're asking for? He said. A job. It's more than that. Iron Ridge is 15 miles from here. Once you're out there, you don't just leave when you feel like it. You're responsible for feeding 20 men, 3 meals a day, 7 days a week. You'll work alone. No help. No days off. And those men, he jerked his head back toward the store. They're the polite ones. Clara didn't blink. Are you trying to scare me, Mr. Cross? I'm trying to be honest. Then be honest about this. Do you need someone or not? His mouth twitched. It might have been a smile once, but it died before it reached his eyes. Yeah, I need someone. Then I'll take the job. You don't want to know the pay? I want to know when I start. He stared at her, really stared, like he was trying to figure out if she was brave or just desperate, maybe both. Tomorrow, he said finally. Sun up. You'll ride with the supply wagon. Clara nodded. I'll be ready. She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. Mrs. Vance? She looked back. If you can't handle it, if it's too much, don't wait till you break. Just say so. Clara tilted her head slightly. Mr. Cross, I've already broken. That's why I'm still standing. She walked away before he could respond. What? The boarding house was a sagging 2-story building that smelled like boiled cabbage and mildew. Clara paid for one night with money she couldn't afford to spend and sat on the edge of a lumpy bed that creaked under her weight. Through the thin walls, she could hear a man coughing, a woman arguing with someone in a language Clara didn't recognize. Somewhere below, a piano played out of tune. She pulled the newspaper clipping from her pocket and smoothed it flat on her knee. Cook wanted. 2 words that had carried her across 3 territories. She didn't let herself think about what came next. Thinking led to feeling, and feeling led to remembering, and remembering led to the kind of darkness she couldn't afford right now. So instead, she lay down fully clothed, stared at the ceiling, and waited for dawn. The supply wagon arrived just as the sun cracked the horizon, painting the sky in shades of rust and ash. The driver was a wiry man in his 50s with a face like a dried apple. He didn't say much, just gestured for Clara to climb up and handed her a canteen. Name's Otis, he said as the wagon lurched forward. Been hauling supplies to Iron Ridge for 12 years. That long? Cross is a hard man, but he's fair. Pays on time. Doesn't cheat. Otis spat over the side of the wagon. Can't say that about most. They rode in silence for a while, the landscape shifting from scrub brush to rolling hills dotted with juniper and sage. The air smelled like dust and heat, and something wild Clara couldn't name. You know what happened to the last cook? Otis asked suddenly. Clara glanced at him. No. Lasted 2 weeks. Nice lady. Soft hands, soft voice. Cried herself to sleep every night. What made her leave? Otis shrugged. Some folks ain't built for lonely. Clara turned her gaze back to the road. I've been lonely before. Ranch lonely's different. Out there it's just you and the wind and a bunch of men who don't know how to talk to women even if they wanted to. Cross keeps order, but he can't make 'em friendly. I'm not looking for friends. Otis smiled faintly. Then you might just make it. So Iron Ridge appeared slowly, rising out of the land like something that had grown there instead of being built. The main house was low and solid, made of stone and timber that had weathered decades of wind and sun. Beyond it, Clara could see the barn, massive and red, its paint faded but still standing. Corrals spread out in every direction, filled with horses that moved like dark water, and everywhere, dust. It covered everything, the fences, the buildings, the men who stopped working to watch the wagon approach. Otis pulled up near the house and set the brake. "This is you." Clara climbed down, her legs stiff from the ride. She grabbed her bag and looked around. 20 men, maybe more, all of them staring. She didn't wave, didn't smile, just stood there and let them look. The door to the main house opened and Ethan Cross stepped out. He looked the same as he had yesterday, hard, unreadable, already tired of whatever came next. "Mrs. Vance," he said. "You made it." "I said I would." He gestured toward a smaller building off to the side. "That's the cookhouse. Kitchen's inside. Supplies are in the shed behind it. Breakfast is at 5, lunch at noon, dinner at 6. You miss a meal? You'll hear about it." Clara nodded. "Understood. Your quarters are in the back. Small room, but it's private. You need anything, you ask me. Not the men, me." "Understood." He started to turn, then stopped. "One more thing. Some of these men, they're going to test you. See if you fold. Don't fold." Clara met his eyes. "I won't." He held her gaze for a moment, then walked away without another word. The cookhouse was bigger than she'd expected, long and low, with a cast-iron stove that looked like it weighed more than a horse. Pots hung from hooks on the wall, shelves lined with tin plates and dented cups. A massive wooden table that could seat 30 if you crammed them in. And dirt, everywhere. The previous cook had left it a disaster. Grease coated the stove. The floor was sticky. The pantry smelled like something had died in it. Clara set her bag down and rolled up her sleeves. By the time the dinner bell rang, she'd scrubbed the stove until it gleamed, swept the floor twice, and organized the pantry so she could actually find things. She'd also made stew, beef, potatoes, onions, carrots, seasoned with salt and pepper, and a hint of thyme she'd found buried in the back of a cupboard. The men filed in slowly, cautiously, like they weren't sure what to expect. Clara stood by the stove, ladle in hand, and didn't say a word. They sat. They ate. They didn't talk much, but they cleaned their bowls. When the last man left, Clara stood alone in the cookhouse and let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Day 1. She'd survived. The second morning came before Clara was ready for it. She woke in darkness to the sound of boots on wooden floors, men's voices low and rough as they stumbled toward the washhouse. Her room was barely bigger than a closet, a narrow bed, a crate that served as a table, one window that looked out at nothing but scrub and sky. The walls were thin enough that she could hear everything, every cough, every curse, every reminder that she was surrounded by a world that didn't particularly want her in it. She dressed quickly, splashed cold water on her face from the basin, and made her way to the cookhouse while the stars were still visible. The stove took 20 minutes to get hot enough. She'd learned that yesterday. So she started early, building the fire with practiced hands, setting the coffee to boil, pulling out flour and lard for biscuits. By the time the men started filing in, the smell of coffee and frying bacon had filled the room. They came in quietly this time, less curious, more watchful. Clara didn't greet them, just moved between the stove and the table, setting down plates of eggs and bacon, biscuits still steaming from the oven. She'd made gravy, too, thick and peppery, the kind that stuck to your ribs. One of the older hands, a man with a gray beard and shoulders like an ox, grunted as he sat down. "Smells better than yesterday." "That's because I had time to clean the stove," Clara said without looking up. A few men chuckled. The bearded man almost smiled. Cleet sat at the far end of the table. He hadn't said a word to her since she'd arrived, but his eyes tracked her constantly. Not in the way some men looked at women. This was different. This was the look of someone waiting for her to fail. She ignored him. Ethan Cross came in last, as he had the day before. He didn't sit with the men. Instead, he filled a tin cup with coffee and leaned against the doorframe, watching. Clara met his eyes once. He gave her a short nod. Not approval exactly, just acknowledgement. She'd take it. When breakfast was over and the men had gone, Clara started scrubbing dishes. Her hands were already raw from yesterday, the skin cracked and red. But she didn't slow down. There was lunch to prep, bread to bake, a chicken to butcher. The door creaked open behind her. She didn't turn. "You always work this fast?" Ethan's voice. Only when there's work to do. He stepped inside, boots heavy on the floorboards. Most folks take a break between meals. Most folks aren't cooking for 20 men. You need help, you can ask. Clara looked at him over her shoulder. You offering? His mouth twitched, almost a smile. No? Then I don't need help. He watched her for another moment, then turned to leave. But he stopped at the door. The men are talking. Let them talk. They're saying you won't last the week. Clara set down the dish she'd been scrubbing and turned to face him fully. And what are you saying, Mr. Cross? He considered that. I'm saying it's only been 2 days. That mean you think they're right? It means I've seen people quit for less. Clara wiped her hands on her apron. I'm not people. He studied her face like he was reading a map. No, he said quietly. I don't suppose you are. Then he was gone. Clara stood alone in the cookhouse, staring at the empty doorway. Her heart was beating harder than it should have been. She turned back to the dishes and kept working. The days blurred together after that. Wake before dawn, build the fire, make coffee, fry bacon, bake biscuits, serve breakfast, clean, prep lunch, serve lunch, clean, prep dinner, serve dinner, clean, collapse into bed with hands that ached and a back that screamed. Then do it again. The men started to relax around her. Not friendly exactly, but less guarded. They talked while they ate now, about horses, about fences that needed mending, about a mountain lion someone had spotted near the north pasture. Clara learned their names without asking. The bearded man was Walt. The youngest one with the scraggly beard was Tommy. There was a silent Mexican hand named Carlos who always nodded his thanks, a wiry man called Rook who laughed too loud at his own jokes, and Cleet who still watched her like she was a puzzle he couldn't solve. On the 5th day, Walt approached her after breakfast. He held his hat in his hands, turning it over and over. Ma'am, he said, just wanted to say this is the best food we've had in a long time. Clara paused, surprised. Thank you. Last cook couldn't make biscuits worth a damn. Yours are… He searched for the word. Real good. She almost smiled. I appreciate that, Walt. He nodded and left, still turning his hat. It was a small thing, but small things mattered out here. By the end of the first week, Clara had fallen into a rhythm. She knew how much coffee to make, how many biscuits to bake, which men liked their eggs scrambled and which wanted them fried. She'd reorganized the entire pantry, scrubbed the cookhouse from top to bottom, and even fixed a broken hinge on the door. The work was brutal, but it was hers. On Sunday, Ethan gave the men the afternoon off. Most of them rode into town. A few stayed behind to play cards in the bunkhouse. Clara used the quiet to tackle the stove. It needed a deep clean, the kind that required taking half of it apart and scrubbing pieces she couldn't normally reach. She was elbow-deep in grease when the door opened. Tommy stumbled in, looking pale. Ma'am, you got anything for a headache? Clara wiped her hands. Sit down. He sat heavily at the table. Up close, she could see he was sweating. You drink last night? She asked. No, ma'am, I don't drink much. She pressed the back of her hand to his forehead, burning up. You're running a fever. I'm fine, just need some water maybe. You're not fine. When did this start? This morning. Thought it'd pass. Clara turned toward the pantry, already mentally cataloging what she had. Willow bark for the fever. Chamomile if she could find it. Something to bring down the heat before it got worse. Stay here, she said. Don't move. She spent the next hour brewing tea, soaking rags in cold water, forcing Tommy to drink even when he protested. By evening, his fever had broken. He fell asleep at the table, head pillowed on his arms. Walt came looking for him around dinner time and found Clara sitting across from the sleeping boy, mending a shirt by lamplight. He all right? Walt asked quietly. He will be. Just needs rest. Walt looked at Tommy, then at Clara. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did. Most folks wouldn't have. Clara set down her mending. I'm not most folks. Walt smiled, a real smile this time. No, ma'am, you sure ain't. Word spread fast after that. Clara had nursed Tommy back from a fever. Clara had stayed up half the night to make sure he was breathing right. Clara hadn't asked for help or made a fuss. She'd just done it. The men looked at her differently after that. Not like a cook, like someone who gave a damn. 2 weeks in, Clara woke to shouting. She dressed fast and ran outside. Half the ranch was already gathered near the main corral, where a massive roan horse was throwing itself against the fence. "Someone get a rope!" Ethan's voice sharp and commanding. Clara pushed through the crowd. In the center of the corral, Tommy was on the ground, clutching his arm. The roan was wheeling, eyes rolling white, ready to charge again. She didn't think, just moved. Clara climbed the fence and dropped into the corral before anyone could stop her. "Get out of there!" Ethan shouted. She ignored him. The horse was panicking, not vicious. She could see it in the way it moved, confused, scared, lashing out because it didn't know what else to do. She put herself between the horse and Tommy, arms spread wide. "Easy," she said, low and calm. "Easy now." The horse stamped, tossing its head. Clara didn't flinch. "Nobody's going to hurt you." Behind her, she could hear Ethan yelling at someone to get her out. But she stayed focused on the horse, keeping her voice steady, her movement slow. "That's it. Just breathe." The horse took a step back, then another. Clara moved forward, closing the distance inch by inch. "Good," she murmured. "That's good." She reached out slowly. The horse jerked its head but didn't bolt. Her hand touched its neck, warm, trembling. "See?" she whispered. "Nothing to be afraid of." The horse blew out a long breath and went still. Behind her, Tommy was being pulled under the fence. The men were dead silent. Clara kept her hand on the horse's neck, stroking slowly, until she felt the tension drain out of its body. Then she turned and walked back across the corral like nothing had happened. Ethan was waiting at the fence, his face carved from stone. "What the hell were you thinking?" "I was thinking Tommy was about to get trampled." "You could have been killed." "But I wasn't." His jaw worked. She could see him trying to find the words, trying to figure out if he should fire her or lock her in a room. "Don't ever do that again." "Then don't let your men work green horses alone." She walked past him before he could respond. Her hands were shaking. She didn't let anyone see. That night, Walt knocked on her door with a bottle of whiskey. "For your nerves," he said. Clara took it. "I don't drink." "Maybe you should start." She almost laughed. Almost. The next morning, Tommy showed up at breakfast with his arm in a sling and his eyes on the floor. "Ma'am," he said, "I owe you my life." Clara set down a plate of eggs. "You don't owe me anything. Just be more careful." "I mean it. If you hadn't—" "Tommy." She looked at him directly. "You're all right. That's all that matters." He nodded, blinking hard. After breakfast, Ethan found her in the pantry. "That was stupid," he said. "I know." "You could have died." "I know." He crossed his arms, leaning against the doorframe. "Why'd you do it?" Clara turned to face him. "Because nobody else was going to." He stared at her, really stared, like he was seeing something he hadn't expected. "You're not what I thought you'd be." "What did you think I'd be?" "Softer." Clara smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Soft doesn't survive out here." "No," Ethan said quietly. "It doesn't." He left without saying anything else. But the next day, she found a new set of kitchen knives waiting on the counter. Sharp, well-made, expensive. There was no note, but she knew who they were from. The third week brought rain. Not the gentle kind. Violent, pounding sheets that turned the ground to mud and made every chore twice as hard. The men came in for meals soaked to the bone, tracking dirt everywhere. Clara stopped trying to keep the floor clean and just focused on keeping them fed. One evening, Rook slipped in the mud and gashed his leg open on a fence post. Carlos half carried him to the cookhouse, blood soaking through his pants. Clara took one look and pointed at the table. "Lay him down." "Ma'am, we can handle—" "I said lay him down." They did. She boiled water, grabbed the sharpest knife, and poured whiskey over the wound. Rook screamed. "Hold him," she told Carlos. It took 12 stitches. Her hands didn't shake once. When it was over, Rook was pale and sweating, but the bleeding had stopped. "You've done this before," Carlos said. "Farm accidents," Clara said, washing her hands. "You learn fast or people die." Rook looked up at her with something like awe. "Thank you, ma'am," she nodded. "Try not to fall on anything sharp for a while." That night, she sat alone in her room and let herself shake. Let herself remember the last time she'd stitched a wound. Her husband, 3 days before the fever took him, a cut on his hand that got infected. She'd saved Rook, but she hadn't been able to save the man she loved. The tears came hard and fast, and she buried her face in her hands so no one would hear. By the 4th week, Clara had become part of the ranch's rhythm. The men didn't question her anymore, didn't test her. They just showed up, ate what she made, and treated her with a kind of rough respect that felt harder earned than anything she'd ever known. Cleet was the last holdout. He still watched her with narrow eyes, still didn't say thank you, still acted like her presence was a personal offense. One afternoon, she found him in the cookhouse, going through her supplies. "Can I help you?" she asked. He turned, holding a tin of tobacco. "This yours?" "No, and that's not food." "Found it in the pantry. Then someone left it there by mistake. Put it back." He didn't move. "You think you run this place now?" Clara set down the pot she'd been carrying. "I think I run the kitchen, and you're standing in it." "You're awfully mouthy for someone who just got here. And you're awfully interested in a woman you claim to have no use for." His face darkened. "I got no use for women who think they're better than they are." "Good thing I don't think I'm better than anyone. I just think I'm better than you." For a second, she thought he might actually hit her. His hand curled into a fist. The door banged open. Ethan stood in the doorway, his eyes cold. "Cleet, get out." Cleet's jaw worked, but he put the tobacco down and walked out without another word. Ethan waited until he was gone, then looked at Clara. "You all right?" "Fine." "He give you trouble again, you tell me." "I can handle Cleet." "I know you can, but you shouldn't have to." Something in his voice made her pause. She studied his face, hard and unreadable as always, but there was something else there now, something almost protective. "Why do you keep him around?" she asked. "He's a good worker." "He's an ass." Ethan's mouth twitched. "That too." "So why not fire him?" He was quiet for a moment. "Because good workers are hard to find. And because firing a man for being an ass would mean I'd have to fire half the ranch." Clara almost smiled. "Fair point." He started to leave, then stopped. "For what it's worth, you've lasted longer than I thought you would." "That's supposed to be a compliment?" "It's supposed to be the truth." He left before she could respond. Clara stood alone in the cookhouse, staring at the door. Her heart was doing that thing again, beating too hard, too fast. She turned back to the stove and kept working. The days grew hotter. Summer was settling in with a vengeance, turning the air thick and heavy. The men worked longer hours, coming back exhausted and sunburned. Clara adjusted. Bigger meals, more water, cold buttermilk when she could manage it. One evening, she stepped outside after dinner to get some air. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of copper and blood. Ethan was standing near the corral, one boot on the lower rail, watching the horses. She walked over without thinking about it. "Long day?" she asked. He glanced at her. "They're all long." "Fair enough." They stood in silence for a while. It should have been awkward, but it wasn't. "You ever regret it?" he asked suddenly. "Coming here?" Clara thought about that. "Every day." He looked surprised. "But I don't regret staying," she added. "Why not?" "Because staying means I chose something, and I haven't been able to choose much lately." Ethan nodded slowly. "I know that feeling." She wanted to ask what he meant, wanted to know what had put those lines around his eyes, what had made him so careful with his words. But she didn't. "Some things you didn't ask. Not yet." "You're good at this," he said after a while. "At cooking? At surviving?" Clara smiled, but it was sad. "I've had practice." He turned to look at her fully. In the fading light, his face was softer somehow, less guarded. "You're tougher than most men I know." "Is that your way of saying thank you for not quitting?" "It's my way of saying I'm glad you're here." The words hit her harder than they should have. She looked away, suddenly unsure what to do with them. "I should get back," she said. "Clara." She stopped. He'd never used her first name before. "You did good today," he said. "You do good every day." She didn't trust herself to speak, just nodded and walked back to the cookhouse. Inside, she pressed her palms against the counter and took a slow breath. Something was shifting. Between her and this place. Between her and him. She wasn't sure what it meant. Wasn't sure she wanted to know. But for the first time in 8 months, she felt something other than grief. And that terrified her more than anything else. The stranger arrived on a Tuesday morning, riding a horse too expensive for honest work. Clara was kneading bread dough when she heard the commotion outside. Boots hitting the ground, voices rising in that particular way men's voices did when they were trying to figure out if they should be worried or respectful. She wiped the flour from her hands and moved to the window. The man dismounting near the main house wore a suit. Out here, that meant one of two things: lawyer or trouble. Sometimes both. He was tall, well-fed, with silver hair swept back from a face that had probably been handsome once, but had gone soft around the edges. Everything about him screamed money, from the cut of his coat to the way he handed his reins to Tommy like the boy was a servant. Ethan came out of the barn, his expression already closed off. Clara couldn't hear what they were saying, but she could read Ethan's body language well enough by now. Shoulders tight, jaw set. Whatever this man wanted, Ethan wasn't interested in giving it. The conversation lasted maybe 5 minutes. Then the stranger smiled, the kind of smile that didn't reach anywhere near his eyes, tipped his hat, and rode away. Ethan stood watching him go, his hands curled into fists at his sides. Clara went back to her bread. At dinner, the men were quieter than usual. They ate fast, eyes down, like they were expecting something bad and didn't want to be around when it arrived. After everyone had cleared out, Ethan came into the cookhouse. He didn't say anything, just poured himself coffee and sat at the table. Clara had learned when to push and when to wait. She waited. "That man this morning," Ethan said finally, "Victor Hale, owns the land north of here." Clara kept washing dishes. And he wants my water." She turned to look at him. "Can he take it?" "Not legally, but legally doesn't mean much when you've got enough money to make the law look the other way." "What did you tell him?" "That he could go to hell." Clara almost smiled. "I'm guessing he didn't like that." "No." Ethan stared into his coffee. "No, he didn't." "Is he dangerous?" Ethan looked up at her. "Men like Hale don't get their hands dirty. They just make other people's lives dirty until they get what they want." "So what are you going to do?" "Keep saying no until he gets tired of asking." Clara dried her hands. "And if he doesn't get tired?" Ethan's jaw worked. "Then we'll deal with it when it comes." She wanted to ask more, but his face had gone hard again, locked up tight the way it did when he was done talking. He stood, set his cup in the basin, and walked to the door. Then he paused. "Clara." "Yeah?" "If Hale or any of his men show up here when I'm not around, you don't talk to them, you don't answer questions. You just come find me. Understood?" The seriousness in his voice made her stomach tighten. "Understood." He nodded and left. Clara stood alone in the cookhouse, staring at the door. Outside, the wind had picked up, carrying dust and the smell of rain that wouldn't come. Something bad was headed their way. She could feel it. 3 days later, Walt came back from town with news and a week's worth of supplies. "Hale's been talking," he said as he unloaded flour sacks onto the cookhouse counter, "saying Cross is sitting on water he don't need while decent folks go thirsty." Clara frowned. "That true?" "Hell no. Hale's got 2 wells on his property. He just wants ours so he can expand his herd without paying for a third." "What's the town saying?" Walt's face darkened. "Some folks believe him. Hale's got a way of making himself sound reasonable." "And the rest?" "They don't care either way, long as it don't affect them." Clara set down the jar she'd been holding. "People are like that everywhere." "Yeah." Walt picked up the last sack, "but out here, not caring can get you killed." That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about Hale, about his expensive suit and his smile that didn't mean anything, about the way Ethan's shoulders had gone tight when the man rode away. She got up and walked to the window. The ranch was quiet, just the sound of wind and somewhere far off, a coyote howling. Movement near the barn caught her eye. Ethan walking the fence line with a lantern. She watched him for a long time, watched the way he moved, careful, deliberate, like he was checking for something he hoped he wouldn't find. He was worried. He just wouldn't say it out loud. Clara pressed her forehead against the glass and closed her eyes. The first real blow came a week later. Clara was in Red Hollow picking up supplies when she overheard 2 women talking outside the dry goods store. "I heard she's living out there with all those men. Alone." "It's indecent. More than indecent. It's scandalous." Clara's hands tightened on her basket. Someone should say something. Someone should run her out of town. Clara turned the corner and the women went silent, their faces flushing red. She walked past them without a word, chin up, eyes forward. But inside, something cold had settled in her chest. Inside the store, the clerk was cooler than usual. He didn't meet her eyes when he tallied her order. Didn't make small talk the way he normally did. "That'll be $8, he said flatly. Clara counted out the money. "This the same order as last week?" Prices went up. "By $3. He finally looked at her. "You got a problem with that. Take it up with the owner." She held his gaze. "And if I ask the owner, what's he going to tell me?" The clerk's face hardened. "He's going to tell you that maybe you should find another store." Clara felt the other customers watching, felt the weight of their judgment pressing down on her like a physical thing. She could argue, could make a scene, could demand fairness, but she'd learned a long time ago that fairness wasn't something you demanded. It was something you fought for, and you didn't win every fight. She took her supplies and walked out. The ride back to Iron Ridge felt longer than usual. The sky was the color of old bruises, and the wind kept trying to rip her hat off. When she got back, Ethan was waiting by the cookhouse. "You're late," he said. "Had some trouble in town." His eyes sharpened. "What kind of trouble?" She told him. All of it. The women, the clerk, the sudden price hike. Ethan's face went dark. "That son of a... that..." "It's fine," Clara cut him off. "I paid it." "It's not fine. That's Hale's doing. He's turning the town against you to get at me." "Why me?" "Because hurting you hurts the ranch. And because..." He stopped, jaw working. "Because what?" "Because people talk, Clara. They see a woman living out here with 20 men and they think the worst." "Let them think. It's not that simple. It is that simple. I'm here to work. What people think about it doesn't change that." Ethan ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "You don't understand how this works. Hale spreads enough rumors, makes you look bad enough, and suddenly you can't buy supplies anywhere. Can't show your face in town. Can't what? Exist?" Clara's voice was sharper than she meant it to be. "I've spent the last 8 months being told I can't exist without a husband, without a man to vouch for me, without someone to make me respectable. I'm done caring what people think. This isn't about caring, it's about surviving. I am surviving, right here, doing exactly what I was hired to do." They stared at each other. The air between them felt charged, electric. "I'm not asking you to leave," Ethan said quietly. "I'm asking you to be careful." "I'm always careful." "No, you're always brave. There's a difference." The words hit her harder than they should have. She looked away, blinking against the sudden sting in her eyes. "I should start dinner," she said. He didn't stop her, but that night she found a new lock on the cookhouse door. Heavy, solid, no note. But she knew. The rumors got worse. Within 2 weeks, half of Red Hollow was convinced Clara was running some kind of operation out at Iron Ridge. The stories varied. Some said she was selling herself to the ranch hands. Others claimed she was Ethan's mistress. A few whispered that she'd driven her husband to death and fled west to escape the law. None of it was true. All of it spread like wildfire. Walt stopped going to the saloon because he got tired of defending her. Tommy got into a fistfight with a man who called her a whore. Even quiet Carlos came back from town one day with bruised knuckles and wouldn't say why. The men rallied around her, but Clara could see the toll it was taking. "This is my fault," she told Ethan one evening. "I should leave." "No. I'm making things harder for everyone. Hale is making things harder, not you." Same result. Ethan stepped closer. "You leave. He wins. Is that what you want?" "I want to stop being the reason people are getting hurt." "You're not the reason. You're the excuse. There's a difference." Clara shook her head. "I don't know if there is." "Then let me spell it out for you." His voice was low, intense. "Hale wants my water. He can't take it legally, so he's trying to break me down piece by piece. First he turns the town against the ranch, then he makes sure we can't get supplies. Then he waits for me to fold. You leaving doesn't stop that. It just means he's already won. So what do? You stay. You keep your head up, and you let me handle Hale. I'm not good at letting other people handle things." I noticed. Something in his voice made her look up. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "Really? Why fight this hard for a cook? Because you're not just a cook. He said it simply, like it was obvious. And because the day you walked into that store and stood up to Cleet, I knew you were exactly the kind of person this ranch needed. I didn't do that for the ranch. I did it because I needed a job. Doesn't matter why you did it. You did it, and you've been doing it every day since. Clara felt something crack open inside her chest, something that had been locked up tight for so long she'd forgotten it was there. Ethan, don't. His voice was rough. Don't say whatever you're about to say. Just stay, please. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. He left before she could change her mind. The town meeting happened on a Saturday. Clara didn't know about it until Walt mentioned it in passing at breakfast. Whole town's getting together tonight to discuss the water situation. She set down the coffee pot. What water situation? Hale's been saying Cross is hoarding water that should be shared. Says it's unneighborly, unchristian. He's a liar. Yeah, well, liars with money get listened to more than honest folks without it. Ethan didn't go to the meeting. Waste of time, he said. Hale's already decided what he wants people to think. But Clara couldn't let it go. Couldn't stand the idea of people sitting around making decisions about Ethan's land, his water, his life, and him not even being there to defend himself. So she went. She borrowed a horse and rode into Red Hollow as the sun was setting. The meeting was being held in the town hall, a squat building that smelled like old wood and older grudges. She tied up her horse and walked inside. The room went silent. Every head turned, every eye locked onto her. Victor Hale stood at the front, mid-sentence. He smiled when he saw her. Well, Mrs. Vance, what a surprise. Clara walked down the center aisle and didn't stop until she was standing directly in front of him. You've been spreading lies about me, she said. Her voice carried in the silent room. I've been telling the truth, Hale said smoothly. That you're a widow living alone with 20 men on a remote ranch. That's not a lie. That's a fact. The lie is what you're implying with it. I'm not implying anything. I'm simply stating the reality of the situation. What people choose to think about that reality is up to them. Clara looked around the room, at the faces staring back at her. Some hostile, some curious, most just uncomfortable. You're right, she said. I am a widow. My husband died 8 months ago. Typhoid took him in 3 days, and I couldn't do anything to stop it. After he died, I lost everything. The farm, the house, everything we'd built together. I came west because I had nowhere else to go and nothing left to lose. She could feel the room shifting, people leaning forward, listening. I took a job at Iron Ridge because it was the only job offered. I cook, I clean. I work 15 hours a day making sure 20 men have hot food and clean plates. That's all. That's everything. That may be, Hale said. But perception matters, Mrs. Vance, and the perception is yours, Clara cut him off. You created it. You spread it. Because you want Ethan Cross's water, and you figured destroying my reputation was an easy way to hurt him. Hale's smile thinned. That's quite an accusation. It's the truth, and everyone in this room knows it. She turned to face the crowd. I don't expect you to like me. I don't expect you to approve of my choices, but I'm standing here in front of all of you, asking you to judge me based on what I've actually done, not on what a rich man with an agenda says I've done. The room was dead silent. Clara's heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears, but she kept her chin up, her voice steady. I've worked harder in the last 6 weeks than most people work in 6 months. I've earned my place at Iron Ridge, and I'm not leaving just because it makes some of you uncomfortable. She turned back to Hale. So you can keep lying, keep spreading rumors, keep trying to break me, but I'm still going to be here, still going to be working, still going to be standing. Hale's face had gone cold. You're a very brave woman, Mrs. Vance, or a very foolish one. Maybe both. She walked out before he could respond. Outside, her hands were shaking so badly she could barely untie her horse. But she'd done it. She'd looked them all in the face and refused to bend. She rode back to Iron Ridge with tears streaming down her face and something fierce and wild burning in her chest. When she got back, Ethan was waiting. He didn't ask what happened, just looked at her face and seemed to understand. You shouldn't have gone, he said quietly. I know. Hale's going to come after you now. I know that too. He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the worry etched into every line of his face. Clara, don't. She held up a hand. Don't try to protect me from this. I chose it. I own it. You shouldn't have to fight this fight. Neither should you, but here we are. He studied her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. Here we are. They stood there in the darkness, two people who'd been broken by life and were still somehow standing. And for the first time since her husband died, Clara didn't feel alone. 2 nights later, the barn burned. Clara woke to shouting and the smell of smoke. She stumbled out of bed, pulled on her boots, and ran outside. The sky was orange. Flames climbed the barn walls like living things, hungry and relentless. Men were running everywhere, pulling horses from the corral, hauling buckets of water that did nothing against the inferno, yelling orders that got lost in the roar of the fire. Clara ran toward the chaos without thinking. "Get back!" someone yelled. She ignored them. A horse was screaming inside the barn, high and terrible, the sound of pure terror. "There's still horses in there," she shouted. "It's too late." Walt grabbed her arm. "The whole thing's coming down." "Then we get them out before it does." She ripped free and ran for the barn door. The heat hit her like a wall, stealing the air from her lungs. Behind her, she heard Ethan yelling her name. She didn't stop. Inside, the smoke was so thick she couldn't see. She dropped low, covering her mouth with her sleeve, and moved toward the sound of the screaming horse. She found it in the back stall, a young mare, eyes rolling white, throwing itself against the walls. Clara grabbed the lead rope and pulled. The horse reared. "Move!" she screamed. The mare planted its feet. Behind her, a beam cracked and fell, sending sparks everywhere. Clara didn't have time to think. She slapped the mare hard across the flank and yelled loud enough to hurt her own throat. The horse bolted. Clara ran after it, lungs burning, eyes streaming. She could feel the heat blistering her skin, could hear the barn groaning above her like it was dying. She burst through the door and fell to her knees, gasping. Hands pulled her away from the building. Someone threw a blanket over her shoulders. Someone else was yelling for water. She looked up. Ethan was kneeling in front of her, his face covered in soot, his eyes wild. "What the hell were you thinking?" She coughed, trying to get air. "Horse. You could have died." "Didn't." He looked like he wanted to shake her, or kiss her, or both. Instead, he pulled her against his chest and held on like she might disappear. Clara's hands fisted in his shirt. She was shaking. He was shaking. Behind them, the barn collapsed with a sound like the world ending. They stayed there, kneeling in the dirt, holding each other while everything burned. When dawn came, the barn was gone. Just ashes and smoke and the skeleton of what it used to be. The men stood around looking shell-shocked. Some of them were crying. They'd lost equipment, supplies, months of work. But they'd saved the horses. All of them. Clara sat on an overturned bucket, wrapped in a blanket, watching the sun come up over the ruins. Ethan walked over and sat down beside her. "It was hail," he said. His voice was flat, empty. "Had to be." Clara didn't disagree. "He's trying to burn me out, literally." "What are you going to do?" Ethan was quiet for a long time. "Rebuild. What else can I do?" She looked at him. His face was haggard, exhausted, but his jaw was set. "You're not going to quit," she said. "No. Even though he'll just do it again. Probably." "That's insane." "Yeah." He met her eyes. "But so is running into a burning barn to save a horse." Clara almost smiled. "Fair point." They sat in silence, watching the smoke curl up into the morning sky. "Thank you," Ethan said quietly. "For the horse. For staying. For all of it." "You already thanked me. With the knives." "I'm thanking you again." She turned to look at him properly. His face was close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his eyes, the scar above his left eyebrow, the way his mouth was set in a line that was trying very hard not to break. "Ethan, I know." He said it softly. "I know." Whatever had been building between them for weeks finally crystallized into something real, something undeniable. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. His hand cupped her face, rough and gentle at the same time, and then he kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't careful. It was desperate and fierce and full of everything neither of them had said out loud. When they finally pulled apart, Clara's heart was racing. We shouldn't, she whispered. I know. People will talk. Let them, she laughed, broken and breathless. You said that mattered. I was wrong. He kissed her again, softer this time, like he was memorizing the shape of her. When he pulled back, his forehead rested against hers. Stay, he said. No matter what happens, stay. Clara closed her eyes. I'm not going anywhere. The sun rose higher, the ashes cooled, and somewhere in Red Hollow, Victor Hale woke up thinking he'd won. He had no idea what was coming. The morning after the fire, Clara woke to the sound of hammers. She sat up, disoriented, her throat raw from smoke, and her body aching in places she didn't know could ache. Sunlight streamed through the small window of her room, and for a moment she couldn't remember why everything hurt. Then it all came back. The flames, the screaming horse, Ethan's hands on her face, his mouth on hers. She touched her lips, half expecting to find they'd imagined it. They hadn't. Outside, men were already at work. She could hear Walt's voice calling out measurements, the rasp of saws cutting through timber, the steady rhythm of rebuilding. Clara dressed quickly, ignoring the blisters on her hands and the way her lungs still felt tight. When she stepped outside, the scene stopped her cold. Where the barn had stood was now a charred skeleton, but around it, every single ranch hand was working. Some were clearing debris. Others were hauling fresh timber from the lumber pile. Tommy and Carlos were digging post holes. Even Cleet was there, stripped to his undershirt, sweat already soaking through the fabric. And in the middle of it all stood Ethan, sleeves rolled up, giving orders with the quiet authority of a man who'd rebuilt things before. He saw her and stopped mid-sentence. For a moment, they just looked at each other across the wreckage. Then he nodded once, acknowledgement, maybe gratitude, and turned back to the work. Clara walked to the cookhouse. Her cookhouse. Still standing. She had meals to make, men to feed, work to do. That's what survival looked like. You got up, you kept going, you didn't let the fire win. Breakfast was ready by 6. She rang the bell and the men came in groups, covered in ash and sweat, moving like they'd already put in a full day's work. Nobody talked much. They were too tired. But when Walt sat down and took his first bite of scrambled eggs, he looked up at her with something like reverence. You're still here, he said. Clara poured him coffee. Where else would I be? Most people would have run after last night. I'm not most people. Walt smiled, tired but genuine. No, ma'am. You sure ain't. The others nodded their agreement. Even Cleet, who'd barely looked at her in weeks, met her eyes across the table. You got guts, he said. Gruff, uncomfortable, but sincere. I'll give you that. It wasn't an apology, but coming from Cleet, it was close enough. Clara nodded. Eat your breakfast before it gets cold. After the men cleared out, Ethan came in alone. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, soot still smudged across his jaw, shoulders hunched under the weight of everything that had happened. Clara poured him coffee without asking and set it in front of him. You should eat, she said. Not hungry. Eat anyway. He looked up at her, something almost like a smile touching his mouth. You always this bossy? Only when people need bossing. She made him a plate, eggs, bacon, 2 biscuits with butter, and set it down. He stared at it for a moment, then picked up his fork. They didn't talk about the kiss, didn't talk about what it meant or what came next. There wasn't time for that. How bad is it? Clara asked, sitting down across from him. Ethan chewed slowly, thinking. Bad. We lost most of the equipment. Winter feed, tools we can't replace easily. Can you rebuild? We'll have to. Can't run a ranch without a barn. How long will it take? Months, if we're lucky. He set down his fork. If Hale doesn't burn it down again. Clara's jaw tightened. You think he will? I think he's going to keep pushing until I break or fight back. So fight back. With what? I've got no proof it was him. No witnesses. Nothing that'll hold up if I go to the law. Then don't go to the law. Ethan looked at her sharply. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that men like Hale don't stop because you ask nicely. They stop when the cost gets too high. Clara said, I'm not saying burn his barn down. I'm saying make him understand that every move he makes against you costs him something too. Ethan was quiet for a long time, studying her face. You've got a ruthless streak. I've got a practical streak. There's a difference. He almost smiled. Is there? You tell me. You're the one who hired a widow with nothing to lose. This time he did smile, small and fleeting, but real. Best decision I ever made. The words settled between them, heavy with meaning. Clara stood abruptly, suddenly too aware of the way he was looking at her. I need to start on lunch. Clara. She stopped, hands gripping the back of the chair. Last night, he started. Was last night, she finished. And today we have work to do. He nodded slowly. Yeah, we do. But neither of them moved. For what it's worth, Ethan said quietly, I meant it. What I said about staying. Clara's throat tightened. I know. And the other thing, I didn't do that because I was scared or desperate or, Ethan. She turned to face him. I know. He held her gaze. Do you? Yes. The air between them felt charged again, like lightning about to strike. Clara forced herself to look away. Go. Your men need you. He stood, hesitated, then walked to the door, but he stopped with his hand on the frame. This isn't over, he said. Not a threat. A promise. I know that too. He left. Clara stood alone in the cookhouse, her heart pounding, and wondered what the hell she was doing. She'd come here to survive, to work, to disappear into the kind of labor that didn't leave room for feeling. But Ethan Cross was making her feel things she'd thought died with her husband, and that terrified her more than any fire. The days that followed were brutal. The men worked from sunup to sundown, rebuilding the barn piece by piece. Clara kept them fed, kept them watered, kept them moving when exhaustion tried to drag them down. She also kept her distance from Ethan. Not cold exactly, just careful, professional. But she could feel him watching her, could sense the weight of all the things they weren't saying pressing down on both of them. A week after the fire, Walt came back from town with more than just supplies. People are talking, he said, unloading flour into the pantry. Clara didn't look up from the pie dough she was rolling. People are always talking. This is different. They're saying Hale didn't have anything to do with the fire. Her hands stilled. What? They're saying it was an accident, faulty lantern, bad luck. That's bullshit. I know that. You know that. But Hale's been real visible in town lately, buying drinks at the saloon, donating money to the school, playing the concerned neighbor. Clara's jaw clenched. So he burns down our barn and then acts like a saint. That's about the size of it. She went back to rolling dough, pressing harder than necessary. Did anyone push back? Walt hesitated. A few, but Hale's got influence and money. Most folks would rather believe him than cross him. What about the sheriff? Came out here 3 days ago, looked around, said there was no evidence of foul play. He bought off? Don't know, maybe. Or maybe he just don't want the trouble. Clara slammed the rolling pin down. This is insane. Welcome to the frontier, where the man with the most money writes the story. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about Hale, about his smile, his expensive suit, the way he'd looked at her in the town hall like she was something to be swept aside. She got dressed and walked outside. The air was cool, the sky full of stars. The half-built barn stood like a monument to everything they'd lost and everything they were fighting to get back. She heard footsteps behind her. Can't sleep either? Ethan's voice. She didn't turn. Too angry. He came to stand beside her. Yeah, I know the feeling. They stood in silence for a while, looking at the barn. Walt told me what people are saying in town, Clara said finally. Figured he would. You just going to let Hale get away with it? What choice do I have? She turned to face him. You could tell the truth. Loud enough that people can't ignore it. I've been telling the truth. Nobody's listening. Then make them listen. How? Clara didn't have an answer. Just anger and frustration, and the bone-deep certainty that letting Hale win was worse than anything else they could do. Ethan must have seen it on her face because his expression softened. You can't fight every battle, Clara. Why not? Because you'll lose yourself trying. I'm not afraid of losing myself. I'm afraid of losing what I've found. The words hung between them. Ethan stepped closer. And what have you found? Clara's heart was racing. Something worth fighting for. He reached out slowly, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. His hand lingered against her cheek. Clara? Don't. Her voice was barely a whisper. Don't say anything that's going to make this harder. What if I want it to be hard? Why would you want that? Because easy things don't last. He searched her face. And I want this to last. Clara closed her eyes. You don't even know what this is. Neither do you. But we could find out. She wanted to. Wanted it so badly it hurt. But wanting things was dangerous. Wanting things meant you had something to lose. I can't, she whispered. Why not? Because I already lost everything once. I can't. I won't do that again. Ethan's hand fell away. So what? You're just going to keep everyone at arm's length for the rest of your life? If that's what it takes to survive, yes. That's not surviving, Clara. That's just existing. She opened her eyes. Maybe that's all I've got left. He looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded once and stepped back. All right, he said quietly. I'll leave you alone. He walked away before she could respond. Clara stood in the darkness, watching him go, and hated herself a little bit more. 2 weeks after the fire, a man showed up at Iron Ridge asking for work. His name was Daniel something. Clara didn't catch the last name. And he was young, maybe 25, with an easy smile and hands that didn't look like they'd done much hard labor. Ethan hired him anyway. They needed the help. But something about Daniel bothered Clara. The way he asked too many questions. The way his eyes tracked everything, cataloging, measuring. The way he seemed a little too interested in how much water the ranch had access to. She mentioned it to Walt one afternoon while she was peeling potatoes. You notice anything odd about the new guy? Walt frowned. Daniel? Not particularly. Why? Just a feeling. What kind of feeling? Clara tried to put it into words. Like he's here for a reason that's got nothing to do with work. Walt's expression darkened. You think Hale sent him? I don't know. Maybe. Want me to talk to Cross? No, not yet. Could be I'm just paranoid. But she wasn't paranoid. She was right. 3 days later, Clara caught Daniel in the barn after dinner, measuring the dimensions of the water troughs. What are you doing? She asked. He jumped, spinning around. Jesus, you scared me. What are you doing? She repeated. Just checking the troughs, making sure they're the right size. That's not your job. I was just trying to help. Clara stepped closer. Who are you working for? Cross, same as everyone else. Try again. Daniel's easy smile slipped. I don't know what you're talking about. You're a terrible liar. Who sent you? For a moment she thought he might keep lying. Then his shoulders sagged. Hale, he said quietly. Victor Hale. Clara's blood went cold. What does he want? Information about the water supply, about how much Cross has access to, about whether he's struggling financially after the fire. And you were just going to report back like a good little spy. Daniel flushed. He's paying me. I needed the money. Everyone needs money. That doesn't make it right. Easy for you to say. You think this is easy? Clara's voice was hard. You think any of this is easy? Daniel looked away. I'm sorry. I needed the work. Then you should have found honest work. She turned to leave, but Daniel grabbed her arm. Wait, please. If you tell Cross, he'll kill me. Clara yanked free. He won't kill you, but he will fire you, and you'll deserve it. I'll leave, tonight. Just don't tell him, please. Clara studied his face, young, scared, stupid. Leave now, she said, before I change my mind. He didn't wait, just grabbed his things and rode out before anyone could ask questions. Clara watched him go, then walked to the main house. Ethan was at his desk, going over ledgers by lamplight. She didn't knock, just walked in. He looked up, surprised. Clara, what? Daniel was working for Hale, she said. Spying. I caught him measuring the water troughs. Ethan stood slowly. Where is he? I sent him away. You what? I sent him away. He was just a kid, scared, desperate for money. Ethan's jaw tightened. He was gathering information for the man who burned down my barn. I know. And you just let him go? Yes. Why? Clara met his eyes. Because killing him won't stop Hale. It'll just give Hale another weapon to use against you. Ethan stared at her. You're protecting me. I'm protecting all of us. By letting a spy walk away? By not giving Hale what he wants. Clara stepped closer. He wants you angry. Wants you to do something stupid so he can point and say, "See? Cross is violent, dangerous, unstable." Don't give him that. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. So what do I do? You keep your head down. You rebuild. You outlast him. That's your plan? Outlast him? You got a better one? He didn't. She could see it on his face. I hate this, he said quietly. I know. I hate that he gets to do whatever he wants and I just have to take it. Then don't take it, but be smart about how you fight back. Ethan looked at her for a long time. When did you get so ruthless? When I realized that being soft gets you killed. Something shifted in his expression. You're not soft. No, I'm not. You're not hard either. You're... What? He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the heat coming off him. Exactly what I need. Clara's breath caught. Ethan, I know. You can't. You won't. You're too scared of losing something. His voice was rough. But I'm standing right here, telling you that I'm not going anywhere. No matter what Hale does, no matter what happens, I'm not leaving. You can't promise that. Watch me. He kissed her, hard and desperate, like he was trying to prove something. Clara should have pulled away, should have remembered all the reasons this was a bad idea. But she didn't. Instead, she grabbed his shirt and kissed him back with everything she had. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. Tell me to stop, he whispered. No. Tell me this is a mistake. It probably is. Then tell me you don't want this. Clara closed her eyes. I can't. Why not? Because I do want this. I want you. And that scares the hell out of me. Ethan's hands came up to frame her face. Good. Be scared. I'm terrified. But I'd rather be terrified with you than alone without you. Clara laughed, broken and wet. That's the worst romantic speech I've ever heard. Yeah, well, I'm not good at this. Neither am I. Then we'll be terrible at it together. She kissed him again. Softer this time. Slower. And for the first time since her husband died, Clara let herself feel something other than grief. The next morning, word came from town that Victor Hale's prize stallion had gone lame. Then his best well ran dry. Then a mysterious fire, small, contained, nothing major, broke out in his storage shed. Nobody could prove anything. But suddenly, Hale wasn't quite so untouchable. Clara didn't ask what Ethan had done, didn't want to know. But she saw the way he looked at her across the dinner table that night, steady and sure and unafraid. And she understood. He'd fought back, not with fire, not with violence, but with the quiet, methodical patience of a man who knew how to wait for the right moment. Hale had underestimated them, had thought that burning the barn would break them. He'd been wrong. The barn went up faster after that. The men worked with renewed energy, fueled by something Clara couldn't quite name but could feel in the air. Hope, maybe. Or just stubbornness. Either way, it was enough. By the end of the month, the frame was complete. The roof was on. The stalls were being built. Iron Ridge was healing, and so was Clara. She still woke up some nights thinking about her husband. Still felt the ache of everything she'd lost. But she also felt something new. Something growing in the spaces grief had carved out. It wasn't happiness. Not yet. But it was close. One evening, as the sun set over the half-finished barn, Ethan found her sitting on the porch steps. He sat down beside her without asking. You did good today, he said. I made stew, same as yesterday. You know what I mean. She did. He was talking about the way she'd quietly convinced 3 more ranch hands to stay when they'd been thinking about leaving, about the way she'd somehow made the cookhouse feel like home. You did good too, she said. I hammered some nails. You kept everyone together. That's harder. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sky turn purple and gold. Clara, Ethan said eventually, I need to ask you something. Her stomach tightened. Okay, this thing between us, Is it real? Or are we just two broken people trying to feel less broken? Clara thought about that. Really thought about it. I don't know, she said honestly. Maybe both. Does it matter? Yeah, it matters. Why? Because I need to know if I'm allowed to fall for you, or if this is just temporary. Clara's throat tightened. You're asking me to make promises I don't know if I can keep. I'm asking you to try. She looked at him, at this hard, complicated man who'd given her a job when nobody else would, who'd protected her, who'd fought for her, who'd kissed her like she was worth fighting for. I'm trying, she whispered. That's all I've got. Ethan reached for her hand. Then it's enough. They sat there, fingers intertwined, as the stars came out one by one. And Clara realized that maybe, just maybe, she was allowed to want this. Allowed to want him. Allowed to want a future that looked nothing like her past. The thought didn't scare her quite as much as it used to. The morning after Ethan took her hand on the porch, Clara woke before dawn to find the world had shifted in some indefinable way. The air felt different, heavier, like something was building just beyond the horizon. She dressed in the dark and made her way to the cookhouse, her boots crunching on frost-hardened ground. Winter was coming early this year. She could feel it in her bones. The fire took longer to catch than usual. Her hands were clumsy, distracted. She kept thinking about Ethan's words from the night before. About trying. About being enough. About the terrifying possibility that maybe she could have this. By the time the men started filing in for breakfast, she'd made enough coffee to drown a small town and burned the first batch of biscuits so badly she had to throw them to the dogs. Walt noticed. You all right, ma'am? Fine. Just tired. He didn't believe her. She could see it in his face. But he was kind enough not to push. Ethan came in last, as always. Their eyes met across the room, and something passed between them. Understanding, maybe, or just recognition that they'd crossed a line neither of them could uncross. He didn't sit with the men. Instead, he poured coffee and leaned against the doorframe, watching her work with an expression she couldn't quite read. When everyone had cleared out, he stayed. You're quiet this morning, he said. Clara scrubbed at a pot that didn't need scrubbing. Thinking. About? Everything. Nothing? I don't know. He set down his cup and crossed to her. Clara, look at me. She did. I meant what I said last night, Ethan told her. All of it. But if it's too much, too fast, if you need space. I don't need space. The words came out sharper than she intended. I don't know what I need. That's the problem. Then we'll figure it out together. What if we can't? Then we'll fail together, but at least we'll have tried. Clara felt something crack inside her chest. Not breaking, just opening wider than she'd thought possible. Before she could respond, the cookhouse door banged open. Walt stood in the doorway, his face pale. Boss, you need to come see this. They followed him outside to where the men had gathered near the main gate. Someone had nailed a notice to the fence post. Clara couldn't read it from a distance, but she could see the official seal at the top. Ethan ripped it down and read it quickly, his expression darkening with every word. What is it? Clara asked. He handed it to her without speaking. It was from the town council of Red Hollow. A formal notice that Mrs. Clara Vance was hereby barred from conducting any business within town limits due to moral impropriety and failure to maintain community standards, signed by Victor Hale as acting chairman. Clara read it twice, then a third time. He can't do this, she said. He just did. But this isn't legal. Is it? Ethan's jaw was tight. In a town like Red Hollow, where Hale owns half the council and intimidates the other half? Yeah, it's legal. So what does this mean? It means you can't buy supplies there, can't set foot in any business, can't exist in their world. Clara felt rage building in her throat. Because of what? Because I work here? Because I'm a woman alone? Because Hale wants to hurt me by hurting you, and because the town council is too spineless to stand up to him. Walt cleared his throat. There's more, boss. Word came in this morning. Hale's been spreading stories, saying Mrs. Vance is your mistress. That the whole cook arrangement was just a front for... He stopped, uncomfortable. For what? Clara demanded. Walt looked at the ground. For improper relations. The words hung in the air like something poisonous. Clara laughed. It came out bitter and hard. Of course that's what he's saying. It gets worse, Walt continued. He's convinced half the merchants in Red Hollow to refuse you service. Says any business that deals with you will lose his patronage. And they're going along with it? Most of them, yeah. Hale's got deep pockets. They can't afford to cross him. Clara felt the ground shifting under her feet. This wasn't just harassment anymore. This was systematic destruction. We'll go to the law, she said. Ethan shook his head. The law answers to whoever pays them most. And right now that's Hale. Then what? We just accept this? No. Ethan's voice was steel. We fight back. But smart, not desperate. He turned to the assembled men. Any of you have a problem with Mrs. Vance staying on at Iron Ridge? Speak now. Silence. Then Tommy stepped forward. She saved my life, boss. Anyone who's got a problem with her has got a problem with me. Carlos nodded. She stitched my leg when I thought I'd bleed out. I stand with her. One by one, the men voiced their support. Even Cleet, who'd been her harshest critic, crossed his arms and said gruffly, She's earned her place here. That's all that matters. Clara felt tears burning behind her eyes. She blinked them back hard. Ethan looked at her. You're not alone in this. I know. And I'm not letting Hale win. I know that too. But knowing didn't make the fear go away. Because Hale had resources they didn't, power they couldn't match, and a willingness to destroy anything that stood in his way. That afternoon, Clara rode into Red Hollow alone. Ethan had tried to stop her, had argued that going into town would only make things worse. But Clara was done hiding, done letting other people decide what she could and couldn't do. She tied her horse outside the general store and walked in with her head high. The clerk, a nervous man named Peters, who'd always been polite before, looked up and went pale. Mrs. Vance, I can't serve you. Why not? Orders from the owner. And who owns this store now? Last I checked, it was old Mr. Henderson. Peters shifted uncomfortably. Henderson sold it last month. New owner has different policies. Let me guess. Victor Hale is the new owner. Peters didn't answer. He didn't need to. Clara looked around the store. At the shelves she'd browsed dozens of times. At the counter where she'd paid for supplies with money she'd earned through backbreaking work. This is my store too, she said quietly. I've spent my wages here, supported this business. And now you're telling me I'm not welcome? I'm sorry, Mrs. Vance, I truly am, but I've got a family to feed. I can't afford to lose this job. Clara understood. She hated it, but she understood. Fine, she said. But you tell your new owner something for me. Tell him that Clara Vance doesn't break easy, and she doesn't forget. She walked out before Peters could respond. Outside, a small crowd had gathered, women whispering behind their hands, men watching with hard eyes. The whole town seemed to be holding its breath, waiting to see what she'd do next. Clara untied her horse and swung up into the saddle. She sat there for a moment, looking at the faces staring back at her. Then she spoke, loud enough for everyone to hear. I know what you've heard about me. I know what Victor Hale has been saying, and I'm here to tell you that none of it is true. I work at Iron Ridge Ranch as a cook. That's all. Everything else is lies told by a man who wants to destroy anyone who stands in his way. Someone in the crowd laughed. You expect us to believe that? A single woman living with 20 men? I expect you to believe the truth. But if you'd rather believe gossip, that's your choice. Just know that the next time Hale decides someone else is in his way, you might be the one everyone's talking about. And when that happens, you'll understand exactly how I feel. She didn't wait for a response, just turned her horse and rode out of town with her spine straight and her eyes dry. But when she was far enough away that no one could see, she let the tears fall. When she got back to Iron Ridge, Ethan was waiting by the corral. He took one look at her face and pulled her down from the horse. What happened? She told him. All of it. The store, the crowd, the way it felt to be judged by people who didn't know her and didn't care to. When she finished, Ethan was quiet for a long time. I'm going to kill him, he said finally. No, you're not. Clara, I mean it, Ethan. You lay a hand on Hale, and everything he's saying about us becomes true. We become the dangerous ones, the violent ones, the ones who deserve to be run out of town. So what do you want me to do? Just stand here and watch him destroy you? I want you to trust me. I do trust you, but I don't trust him. Neither do I. But we're not going to beat him by playing his game. We beat him by playing ours. Ethan searched her face. What game is that? The long game, the patient one. Clara took his hands. Hale thinks he's won. He thinks he's broken us. Let him think that. Let him get comfortable. And then we show everyone who he really is. How? I don't know yet, but we'll figure it out. Ethan pulled her against him. You're either the bravest person I've ever met or the craziest. Can I be both? He laughed despite everything. Yeah, you can be both. They stood there in the fading light, holding each other, while the ranch settled into evening quiet around them. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about Hale, about his expensive suits and his practiced smile and the casual cruelty in his eyes. She thought about all the women like her who'd been destroyed by men like him, who'd been whispered about, shunned, erased from polite society because they didn't fit into neat little boxes. And she thought about how tired she was of being afraid. Around midnight, she got up and lit a lamp, pulled out paper and a pencil, started writing. She wrote about coming west as a widow, about the judgment she'd faced, about the town that had decided she was immoral before they'd ever spoken to her. She wrote about Victor Hale, about his threats and his manipulation and his systematic campaign to destroy anyone who stood in his way. And she wrote about Iron Ridge, about the men who'd given her a chance, about the work that had saved her, about finding strength in places she didn't know she had it. When she finished, the sun was coming up and her hand was cramping, but she had 20 pages of truth. She didn't know what she'd do with it yet. But having it written down, having the story told in her own words, felt like reclaiming something Hale had tried to take. At breakfast, the men were subdued. They'd all heard what happened in town. They knew things were getting worse, but they showed up, they ate, they went to work. Because that's what you did on a ranch. You kept going even when everything else was falling apart. After the men cleared out, Walt lingered behind. Ma'am, he said, I got a cousin over in Silver Creek. Runs a general store there. I could ride over, talk to him about sending supplies. Clara felt warmth bloom in her chest. You do that? Of course. Can't have you going without just because Hale's got a stick up his... He caught himself. Just because Hale's being difficult. Thank you, Walt. He nodded, uncomfortable with gratitude. Ain't nothing. Just doing what's right. That's more than most people are willing to do. He left before she could say anything else. But that afternoon, 2 other ranchers showed up at Iron Ridge. Men who'd bought horses from Ethan before. Men who'd heard what Hale was doing and didn't like it. We're not fancy, one of them said, and we don't carry everything you might need, but if you need supplies, we can help. Why? Clara asked. Why risk Hale's anger for me? The rancher, a grizzled man named Fletcher, shrugged. Because Hale's been pushing everyone around for years, buying up land, threatening people, acting like he owns the whole territory. Someone's got to stand up to him eventually. Might as well be now. The other rancher nodded. Plus, we heard what you did. Standing up to the whole town like that takes guts. That's the kind of person worth helping. Clara didn't know what to say, so she just nodded and thanked them and tried not to cry. After they left, Ethan found her sitting on the cookhouse steps, staring at nothing. You okay? He asked. People are helping us, she said. Why are people helping us? Because you inspired them. I didn't inspire anyone. I just survived. That's the same thing, Clara. Out here, survival is inspiration. She looked up at him. I don't feel very inspiring. I feel scared and angry and tired. Good. That means you're human. He sat down beside her. You know what Hale's biggest mistake was? What? He underestimated you. Thought you'd run at the first sign of trouble. But you didn't run. You stood, and that changed everything. I haven't changed anything yet. Yes, you have. You've changed how people see what's possible. A widow with nothing, standing up to the most powerful man in 3 counties, that's a story people will remember. Clara leaned against his shoulder. I just want to cook and be left alone. I know, but you're not the kind of person who gets left alone. Is that a compliment? It's a fact. They sat in silence for a while, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. Ethan, Clara said quietly, what if we lose? What if Hale wins and I have to leave and all of this was for nothing? Then we lose, but at least we went down fighting. That's not very comforting. No, but it's honest. Clara smiled despite herself. You're terrible at reassurance. I know, it's one of my best qualities. She laughed, really laughed, for the first time in days, and it felt like coming up for air. The turning point came 2 weeks later from a direction no one expected. A woman rode into Iron Ridge on a Sunday afternoon. She was older, maybe 50, with gray-streaked hair and a face that had seen hard years. She introduced herself as Margaret Hayes, owner of a boarding house in a town 2 days' ride west. I heard about what happened, she said to Clara. About Hale. About the town council. Clara tensed. And? And I wanted you to know you're not alone. Hale did the same thing to me 3 years ago. Spread rumors. Destroyed my reputation. Ran me out of Red Hollow. I'm sorry. Margaret waved a hand. Don't be. Best thing that ever happened to me. Moved west, started over, built something better. She paused. But I never forgot. And I never forgave. What are you saying? I'm saying I kept records. Every threat Hale made, every lie he told, every business he destroyed to get what he wanted. And I'm saying I'll testify against him. If you're willing to fight. Claire's heart started pounding. Testify where? Territorial court. I've been waiting for someone brave enough to file charges. Looks like that someone might be you. Clara looked at Ethan. He was already nodding. What do we need to do? Clara asked. Margaret smiled. First, we need to find everyone else Hale's hurt. Build a case so strong even his money can't make it disappear. Then we take him down. Legally, publicly, permanently. Over the next month, they worked quietly. Margaret reached out to other victims. Clara documented every threat, every harassment, every instance of Hale's interference. Ethan hired a lawyer from Santa Fe, a sharp woman named Catherine Ross who specialized in fighting powerful men. And slowly, piece by piece, they built a case. Hale didn't notice at first. He was too busy consolidating his victory, too confident in his power to see the threat building beneath his feet. But then the summons arrived. Clara wasn't there when he received it, but she heard about it later from Walt, who heard about it from a ranch hand who'd been in town. Hale had gone pale, then red, then started shouting about lies and conspiracies and ungrateful women who didn't know their place. The hearing was set for 6 weeks out. In territorial court, with a judge from Denver who had no ties to Red Hollow and no reason to care about Victor Hale's money. Clara spent those 6 weeks terrified, certain something would go wrong, certain Hale would find a way to make it all disappear. But Ethan kept her grounded, and the evidence kept mounting. By the time the hearing date arrived, they had 17 witnesses. Documentation of fraud, intimidation, arson, and corruption stretching back 5 years. And Clara's written testimony, 20 pages of truth in her own words. The hearing lasted 3 days. Clara testified on the second day. She told her story calmly, clearly, without embellishment. Just the facts of what had happened and how Hale had tried to destroy her for refusing to disappear. When she finished, the courtroom was silent. Then Margaret testified. Then the other victims. Then ranch hands who'd been ordered to sabotage competitors. Then merchants who'd been threatened into compliance. By the end of the third day, Hale's lawyer looked defeated. The judge took 1 day to deliberate. When he returned, his verdict was swift and decisive. Victor Hale was found guilty of fraud, corruption, and criminal conspiracy. His assets were frozen pending restitution to his victims. He was barred from holding any public office and ordered to pay damages. It wasn't prison, but it was ruin. Clara stood outside the courthouse afterward, barely able to process what had happened. We won, Ethan said quietly. We won, Clara repeated, like saying it out loud would make it real. Margaret came over and hugged her. You did it. You actually did it. We did it, Clara corrected. All of us. Maybe. But you're the one who had the courage to stand up first. That's what mattered. The ride back to Iron Ridge took 2 days. Clara spent most of it in a daze, expecting at any moment for someone to tell her it had all been a mistake. But when they arrived, the men were waiting, and they'd hung a banner across the barn that read, "Welcome home." Clara burst into tears. Walt shifted uncomfortably. Sorry, ma'am, didn't mean to make you cry. These are good tears, she managed. Happy tears. Didn't know there was a difference. Neither did I. Until now. That night there was a celebration. Nothing fancy, just food and music and people who cared about each other. Clara stood in the middle of it all and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. Later, when everyone had gone to bed, Ethan found her sitting on the porch steps. "You're quiet," he said. "Just thinking." About? About how strange it is. How you can go from having nothing to having everything. You earned everything, Clara. Did I? Or did I just survive long enough for things to get better? Is there a difference? She smiled. You always say that. Because it's always true. He sat down beside her. They didn't talk for a while, just sat together, listening to the night sounds. I have something to ask you, Ethan said finally. Clara's heart picked up. Okay. It's spring. You told me to ask again in spring. She turned to look at him. I did. So I'm asking, Clara Vance, will you marry me? The question hung between them. Clara thought about the woman who'd stepped off that stagecoach months ago, desperate, alone, running out of options. She thought about everything that had happened since, the work, the judgment, the fire, the fight. And she thought about this man beside her, who'd given her a chance, who'd protected her, who'd stood with her when everyone else stood against them. Yes, she said. No hesitation, no fear, just yes. Ethan's face broke into a smile, the first real, unguarded smile she'd ever seen from him. Yeah? Yeah. He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise. When they pulled apart, Clara was crying again. Happy tears? Ethan asked. The happiest. They got married in early June, under a sky so blue it looked painted. The ceremony was simple. A circuit preacher said the words. The ranch hands stood as witnesses. Clara wore a dress she'd made from fabric Walt had bought in Silver Creek. It wasn't fancy, it wasn't perfect, but it was exactly right. Afterward, there was dancing and food and toast that made everyone laugh and cry in equal measure. Walt gave a speech about how Clara had saved the ranch by saving herself. Tommy sang a song that was mostly out of tune but full of heart. Even Cleet raised a glass and said gruffly, "To the toughest damn woman I ever met." And Clara stood in the middle of it all, surrounded by people who'd become family and felt overwhelmed by gratitude. That night, lying beside her husband, she stared at the ceiling and tried to make sense of how her life had changed. What are you thinking about? Ethan asked. Everything. How scared I was when I first got here. How certain I was that I'd fail. And now? Now I'm scared of different things, but mostly I'm just grateful. For what? For you, for this place, for getting a second chance at life when I thought I was done. Ethan pulled her closer. You gave yourself that chance, Clara. Nobody handed it to you. Maybe, but I couldn't have done it alone. Nobody does anything alone. That's the secret they don't tell you. Clara smiled in the darkness. When did you get so wise? When I fell in love with a woman who refused to give up. She taught me things. Like what? Like how to hope again. Like how to fight for something instead of just against things. Like how to... He stopped. Like, how to what? Like, how to live instead of just survive. Clara's throat tightened. I'm still learning that one. Me too. They fell asleep like that. Together. Safe. Home. The years that followed weren't easy. They never were out on the frontier. There were harsh winters and brutal summers, droughts that tested them and storms that tried to break them, cattle that died and crops that failed, and moments when it felt like they were right back where they started. But they weathered it, together. The ranch grew. They hired more hands, built more buildings, expanded their herd. Clara's kitchen became legendary. Ranch hands from 3 counties over talked about her biscuits, her stew, her pies that could make a grown man weep. But more than that, it became a gathering place, a heart. People came to Iron Ridge when they needed help. Widows looking for work, young men running from bad situations, families down on their luck. And Clara never turned anyone away. You're building an empire, Ethan told her one day, watching as she organized work schedules for their growing crew. I'm building a family, Clara corrected. There's a difference. Is there? She smiled. You always ask that. Because I'm always curious about your answer. By their 5th anniversary, Clara had saved enough money to buy a small house in Silver Creek, a place where they could go when they needed distance from the ranch, where they could just be Ethan and Clara without the weight of responsibility. But they rarely used it, because Iron Ridge had become more than a ranch. It had become proof that broken things could heal, that people who'd lost everything could find something worth keeping. That survival, with enough stubborn refusal to quit, could become something like joy. One evening, standing on the porch of the main house they'd built together, Clara watched the sun set over their land. Ethan came to stand beside her. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, their regular question. "About how far we've come." "Any regrets?" Clara thought about that, really thought. "No," she said finally, "not a single one. Not even the hard parts? Especially not the hard parts. They're what made everything else mean something." Ethan took her hand. "I love you, Clara Cross. I love you too." They stood there as darkness fell, as stars appeared one by one as the ranch settled into night. And Clara thought about the woman who'd arrived in Red Hollow all those years ago, scared, desperate, certain she'd never be happy again. That woman would be amazed by who she'd become, not because she'd gotten rich or famous, not because life had gotten easy, but because she'd learned that the opposite of grief wasn't happiness, it was purpose, and she'd found hers, in the work, in the people, in the stubborn refusal to let the world make her small. Clara Vance had come west to survive, but Clara Cross had learned to live, and in the end, that was the only victory that mattered. Years later, when people asked her about those early days at Iron Ridge, Clara always told them the same thing. The frontier doesn't care who you were. It only cares who you're willing to become. She'd become someone who didn't break, who didn't quit, who stood firm when the wind tried to blow her down. She'd become someone who knew that strength wasn't about never falling. It was about getting back up. Every single time, she'd become someone worth the fight. And that, more than anything else, was the story she wanted to be remembered for. Not the widow who lost everything, but the woman who found herself in the ashes and refused to stay there. The woman who proved that the only thing stronger than grief was the human capacity to rebuild. The woman who survived the storm and then taught others how to do the same. That was Clara Cross. And her story, their story, lived on long after she was gone. In the ranch that still stood, in the people who still gathered in the cookhouse, in the legacy of kindness and stubborn courage that became Iron Ridge's foundation. Some stories end, but the best ones, the truest ones, they just keep going, growing and changing and inspiring long after the original tellers are gone. This was one of those stories, and it started with a simple truth. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is survive, and sometimes survival is just the beginning.